All right, so today we're diving into something pretty intense, really. It's all about water scarcity.
Oh, yeah.
But the stuff you send over is really fascinating.
Yeah.
We're looking at this story of Richard Wilson. He's a farmer in California
Right.
who basically took on this drought head on and actually came up with a DIY invention
Wow.
that he calls the Aqua Tower.
Yes. His account is really something. It personalizes this whole water crisis in a way that, just looking at statistics doesn't really do.
Right.
I know?
And the statistics are really frightening.
Yeah.
I mean, Richard points out that we are actually in the midst of the worst drought
I know.
that the U.S. has seen in 1,200 years.
It's incredible.
1,200 years. Can you imagine what kind of impact a drought like that would have had back then?
I know.
And now it's happening again, and we've got a much larger population to deal with.
Yeah, and so much more strain on our existing water systems, you know?
Totally.
And then you start to think about the potential for things like social unrest.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a bit frightening.
It is. And Richard talks about his own personal experiences.
Mm-hmm.
His, drying up, having to ration water.
Oh, wow.
He even talks about a terrifying incident where his uncle tried to steal the remaining water that they had just out of desperation.
Gosh, that just shows you how this kind of scarcity just erodes those community bonds.
Yeah.
Creates this atmosphere of fear and mistrust. It's really sad.
It's like a dystopian novel come to life in a way.
Right.
And then there's this whole other concept of virtual water,
Yes.
which is something I hadn't really considered before.
It's a hidden water footprint, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's huge. Richard uses the example of a cup of coffee,
Okay.
which requires 34 gallons of water to produce.
Wow.
34 gallons. And then you look at a pound of beef, and that's 1,800 gallons. It's astonishing.
It makes you really rethink your grocery list.
It does.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
And, it suddenly makes those almond milk lattes feel a lot less innocent.
Right.
But even beyond those personal choices, Richard actually connects these individual impacts to these much larger historical events.
He does. He brings up the Dust Bowl,
Yeah,
which happened back in the 1930s.
right.
And it's such a stark reminder of what can happen
Of a devastation, yeah.
when you have a prolonged drought.
Exactly.
And he even hints at the possibility of, future water wars,
Okay.
where there's just so much competition for these vital resources.
Yeah, that's a chilling thought. And it feels even more real when you consider, the conflicts that are already simmering over water rights
Yes,
in various parts of the world.
absolutely.
So, we're facing this global crisis. Personal anxieties are running high. What does Richard propose we do about it?
Well, that's where his invention comes into play, this Aqua Tower.
Okay.
It's a really bold attempt to create an independent water source.
It's like he's becoming a water pioneer.
I know.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
And the technology behind it, this atmospheric water generation, sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does, but it's actually a real thing.
Wow.
And it's been used by militaries all over the world for a long time.
Really?
The basic principle is you're extracting moisture from the air and converting it into drinkable water.
So it's like pulling water out of thin air.
That's the idea.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So Richard, along with a friend who's an engineer, basically created a DIY version of this technology.
That's right.
And he claims that they built this prototype for about $200
Wow.
using just readily available materials.
It's amazing if it works the way he says it does.
Right. It's kind of mind-blowing.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that humidity is a key factor.
Yes.
So how does that actually impact the Aqua Tower's effectiveness?
Well, the more moisture there is in the air, the more water the system can extract.
Okay.
It's kind of like squeezing a sponge. Imagine you have a dry sponge. You're not going to get much water out of it.
Right.
But if it's soaking wet, then it's going to pour out.
That makes sense. So even though Richard is in California, which is obviously drought-stricken, his Aqua Tower might not work as well for someone, say, in Arizona.
That's a great point. Yeah, location and climate are huge factors here.
Okay.
And even in humid areas, the temperature and air pressure can impact how much water you can actually generate.
So there's a lot of variables at play.
There are.
Richard briefly mentioned using a portable off-grid power source for the Aqua Tower.
Uh-huh.
How practical is that realistically?
So that's one of the trade-offs with this technology. You do need energy to run these systems,
Right.
whether it's from the grid or solar panels or some other source.
Okay.
And the more water you want to produce, the more energy you're going to need.
So it's a balancing act between output and energy consumption.
Exact.
And then there's the cost factor as well.
That's right. Even if Richard's DIY approach keeps the upfront costs down,
Yeah.
there's still the ongoing cost of energy and maintenance.
Right. So it's not as simple as just building it and forgetting about it.
It's not. It's more involved than that.
But it does raise some interesting questions about water access and affordability.
Absolutely.
Richard talks about his invention as a form of water insurance.
Yeah.
You know, a way to secure his family's supply no matter what.
I can understand why he feels that way, especially after everything he's been through. You know, the drought, his well drying up,
Yeah.
even his own uncle trying to steal their water. It's about taking control in a situation that feels very uncertain.
And with climate change, making these extreme weather events more common,
Yeah.
that feeling of insecurity is likely to spread.
Absolutely. It taps into this growing desire for self-sufficiency.
Right.
You know, the ability to provide for yourself and your loved ones when the systems we rely on start to crumble.
It makes you wonder if DIY solutions like this could become more commonplace in the future.
It's certainly a possibility.
So we've got the backdrop of a global water crisis.
Yeah.
We've got an innovator who's taking matters into his own hands.
Right.
We've got this fascinating technology with a DIY twist. This is shaping up to be one heck of a deep dive.
I agree. It's going to be interesting to see where we go from here.
Absolutely.
Welcome back to our deep dive into this whole world of water scarcity and innovation.
Yeah, we left off with Richard's claim that his Aqua Tower can pull 60 gallons of water a day
Right.
out of thin air
Out of thin air.
for just a couple $100.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable if it's true.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around it.
Hmm.
I mean, how does this atmospheric water generation thing actually work?
Yeah.
Is it really that simple?
Well, the concept itself is fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
You know, it basically mimics the natural process of condensation.
Okay.
Like, think about how dew forms overnight. The air cools, it can't hold as much moisture,
Right.
and so some of that water vapor turns into liquid droplets.
So the Aqua Tower is basically recreating that on a bigger scale.
Exactly.
Hmm.
Most systems use a fan to draw air over a cooled surface.
Okay.
And that cooling can be done through refrigeration evaporation,
Okay.
or even like special materials that can absorb heat at night and then release it during the day.
So Richard's design is like a DIY, more affordable take on this existing technology.
That's what he claims. You know, he and his engineer friend really focused on using readily available materials
Yeah.
to try and keep those costs down. It's a really ingenious approach if it can actually deliver on those promises.
You mentioned earlier that humidity is a key factor.
Yes,
So how does that impact the effectiveness of the Aqua Tower?
it's absolutely crucial. The more moisture there is in the air, the more water that system can pull out.
Oh, okay.
It's like we were talking about with the sponge. You know, a dry sponge, you're not going to get much out of it.
Right.
But a soaking wet sponge, you can really wring it out.
So even though Richard's in California where they're having this drought, his Aqua Tower might not work as well for someone, say, in Arizona.
That's right. It's not like a one-size-fits-all solution.
Got it.
Location and climate play a huge role.
Okay.
And even in places with high humidity, like temperature and air pressure can impact how much water you can actually generate.
Richard mentioned using a portable off-grid power source for his Aqua Tower.
Yes.
How practical is that realistically?
Well, that's one of those trade-offs. You do need energy to run these systems,
Oh, yes.
whether it's from the grid, from solar panels, or some other source.
Yeah.
And the more water you want, the more energy you're going to need.
So it's a balancing act
Exactly.
between how much water you can get out and how much energy you have to put in.
Right.
And then, of course, there's the cost.
Yes. Even if Richard's DIY approach keeps that initial price down, you still have to think about the ongoing cost of energy and maintenance.
So it's not just as simple as building it and walking away.
It's definitely more involved.
It's interesting, though, because it raises those questions about water access and affordability.
Absolutely.
And I know Richard talks about his invention as a form of water insurance.
Right.
A way to make sure his family has what they need no matter what happens.
And given everything he's been through, the drought, the well drying up,
Yeah.
his own uncle trying to steal their water, I can definitely see why he feels that way.
It's about taking control
It is.
when things feel really uncertain.
Exactly. And as these extreme weather events become more and more common because of climate change,
Yeah.
that sense of insecurity, I think, is only going to grow.
It makes you wonder if these DIY solutions
Right.
are going to become more and more common.
It's definitely a possibility. You know, this idea that you have to be able to take care of yourself and the people you love when the systems we depend on start to fail.
So we've got this global water crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We have this really passionate innovator who's taking things into his own hands.
Right.
And we've got this incredible technology
I know.
that has this DIY twist. It's a really fascinating story.
It is. It makes you think about all the different ways we're going to have to adapt.
Yeah. What are we going to have to do in the future to ensure that everybody has access to clean water?
That's the big question.
Yeah.
And it's one that we need to start addressing now.
We've been talking a lot about the technical side of the Aqua Tower, but what about its real-world applications?
Yeah.
Could this actually work on a larger scale?
That's where things get really interesting. Richard's focus is on individual households,
Mm-hmm.
but this atmospheric water generation technology could actually have a much broader impact.
Where else could it be useful?
Well, think about disaster relief. Providing clean drinking water
Oh, right.
is always a huge challenge after a hurricane or an earthquake.
Having a system like this that's portable could be a game changer.
Exactly.
Right.
It offers this decentralized way to get clean water to people,
Right.
and you're not relying on that traditional infrastructure, which might be damaged or destroyed.
That makes sense. What about like remote communities or places with limited water access?
Absolutely.
Right.
Those villages in arid regions or island populations that are dealing with water stress?
Yeah.
This could be a real lifeline for them.
It gives them a source of water they wouldn't otherwise have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that technology alone can't solve this water crisis.
What do you mean by that?
Well, we can't just keep developing new gadgets and expect everything to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
We also have to address the root causes of this scarcity.
Like what kinds of things?
Well, things like overconsumption, pollution, inefficient infrastructure,
Yeah.
and of course the impacts of climate change. These are complex, interconnected issues
Right.
that require a much more holistic approach.
So it's not an either-or situation.
No, it's not.
We need individual innovation, and we also need larger scale solutions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about combining those sustainable water management practices with responsible consumption.
Right.
And making sure that these technological advancements are appropriate and accessible to everyone.
It's a lot to think about.
It is.
We've gone from Richard's personal story to the nitty-gritty of atmospheric water generation.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about solutions on a global scale.
It's been a fascinating journey so far.
I agree. It's been quite a deep dive.
It has. In the final part, we're going to delve even deeper into the social and economic impacts of this water scarcity.
Okay.
We'll look at some alternative solutions
That's good.
and really consider what steps we can all take to create a more water-secure future.
As we head into that final part, I want to encourage you, the listener, to really think about what we've talked about so far. What resonates with you? What questions do you still have? True knowledge isn't just about absorbing information.
That's right.
It's about actively engaging with it. So let's continue this conversation in part 3. So welcome back to the deep dive. We've been really unpacking this world of water scarcity.
Yeah.
From those personal stories to innovative solutions like Richard's Aqua Tower.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
But now I want to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. What are the social and economic consequences
Right.
of water scarcity? This feels bigger than just dry faucets.
Oh, it absolutely is. Water is the foundation of so much of our lives. Our health, our food systems, our industries. And when that foundation starts to crack, the ripple effects are just enormous.
Yeah, Richard touched on this in his story.
Yeah.
He talked about how it strained his community,
Yes.
how there were rising tensions, and even the potential for conflict as water became more and more scarce.
Yeah. It's sad, but it's true.
It almost feels like it brings out the worst in people sometimes.
Unfortunately, that can happen. Water scarcity can act as a threat multiplier.
Okay.
So those existing social and economic inequalities, they just get amplified.
Right.
And that can lead to political instability pretty quickly.
It's a domino effect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Shortages lead to higher prices, which of course hit low-income communities the hardest.
Of course.
Farmers can't irrigate their crops, so food becomes more scarce and more expensive.
Exactly.
Businesses that rely on water have to shut down, impacting jobs.
Right.
And that affects the whole economy.
It's a whole cascade of challenges
Yeah.
that can really unravel the fabric of society.
Yeah.
And then as competition for water intensifies, we often see a rise in conflict, both within and between countries.
It's a scary thought. And history is full of examples of water disputes escalating into violence.
It is.
And with climate change adding even more pressure to these already strained water resources, it feels like this is a trend that's only going to get worse.
It's a real concern. Water security is no longer just an environmental issue.
Right.
It's a human rights issue,
Yeah.
a national security issue, a global security issue. And we need to start treating it that way.
We've talked about technological solutions like the Aqua Tower, but it feels like we need a much broader approach to really tackle this. What else can be done?
You're absolutely right. Technology alone isn't enough. We need a multi-pronged strategy
Okay.
that addresses both the supply and the demand side of the equation.
What do you mean by that?
Well, on the supply side, we need to get serious about sustainable water management.
Okay.
That means things like improving our infrastructure to reduce leaks and waste,
Makes sense.
exploring alternative water sources like desalination, rainwater harvesting. And we have to protect our existing water bodies from pollution.
So basically being smarter about how we use and manage the water we already have.
Exactly. But then there's also the demand side.
Okay.
We need to promote water conservation
Right.
in our homes, our businesses, and in agriculture. And we have to be mindful of that virtual water footprint.
So like you said earlier, what we eat, what we wear, how much energy we use,
It all adds up.
all of those choices have an impact on our overall water consumption.
They do. It's about recognizing that our actions are all interconnected.
Right.
Even small changes can make a big difference when we all do them together.
So there is hope. We can turn things around.
There is.
It's not just all doom and gloom. We have the power to make a difference.
We do both individually and collectively.
Speaking of making a difference, we've talked a lot about the Aqua Tower, but what other innovations are out there? Are there other promising solutions to this water scarcity challenge?
There are some really interesting things happening out there. Well, one area that's really exciting is biomimicry.
Biomimicry.
Yeah, basically taking inspiration from nature to develop more efficient and sustainable ways to manage water.
Oh, that's so cool.
Well,
So learning from nature's design.
exactly. Nature has had billions of years to perfect its designs.
Right.
So it makes sense to learn from those processes.
Totally. What kind of things are they looking at?
Well, there's this beetle in the Namib Desert that actually collects moisture from fog on its back.
Wow.
Scientists are studying its shell structure to try and design materials that can capture and condense water,
That's amazing.
even in the driest climates.
So we can actually pull water out of the air, even in a desert.
That's the idea.
That's incredible. It's pretty amazing what nature can do.
What else is out there?
Well, nanotechnology is another really promising area.
Okay.
Researchers are developing these advanced filtration membranes that can remove contaminants from water at the molecular level.
Wow.
So even heavily polluted water sources could potentially become safe to drink.
That would be a game changer. It really could. It seems like combining human ingenuity with that respect for nature's wisdom is really key to finding solutions to this crisis.
This deep dive has been incredible.
It has.
It's really opened my eyes to how complex this issue is, but also to all the potential solutions that are out there.
It's not a simple problem, but it's one that we can solve.
It's been a great conversation.
It has, and hopefully our listeners are walking away with a deeper understanding of just how important water is.
If there's one thing I want our listeners to take away from this, is that water is life.
Absolutely.
It's a precious resource, and we need to value it, conserve it, and manage it wisely.
It's not just about survival, it's about thriving.
Exactly.
Having access to clean water is fundamental to human health and well-being.
So what can our listeners do to make a difference?
We'll start by being more mindful of your own water use.
All right.
Look for ways to conserve water at home and in your daily life. Support organizations that are working on water conservation and sustainable solutions.
Yes, educate yourself about the issue. Talk to your friends and family about it.
Right.
Remember, every action, no matter how small, can contribute to a more sustainable water future for everyone.
If you'd like to learn more about some of the solutions we discussed today, you can find a ton of information on our blog at www.thehealthknowledgebase.com.
We have articles, resources, even guides to help you reduce your water footprint.
So check it out.
This has been The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.